We are studying Sri Aurobindo's commentary on the Brihadaranyaka Upanishad, and specifically the first verse of this deeply mystical text that Sri Aurobindo describes as at once the most obscure and the profoundest of the Upanishads. And we have already in our study had some glimpse of this sense of depth and profundity of the imagery. The image is very simply that of a horse. And the text goes for the first verse, Om, dawn is the head of the horse sacrificial. The sun is his eye. His breath is the wind. His open mouth is fire, the master might universal. Time is the self of the horse, sacrificial. Heaven is his back, and the mid-world his belly. Earth is his footing. The regions are his flanks, and the lesser regions their ribs. The seasons his members. The months and the half-months are their joints. The days and nights are his standing place. The stars, his bones, and the sky is the flesh of his body. The strands are the food in his belly. The rivers are his veins. His liver and his lungs are the mountains. Herbs and plants are his hairs. The rising is his front, and the setting his hinder portion. When he stretches himself, then it lightens. When he shakes his frame, then it thunders. When he urines, then it rains. Speech, verily, is the sound of him. And in the second verse, the Upanishad describes how he carries on his back the gods, the Gandharvas, the Titans, and mankind. And his birthplace and his brother is the ocean. So this image immediately projects before us a vast image of something cosmic. We see before our eyes a horse, and the different parts of his being are different powers, aspects, movements, processes of the cosmos itself. And especially when we see the upper portions, the back of the horse identified with the heavens, the feet with the earth, we see immediately this horse standing across the different planes of existence, and we realize it is not an ordinary material horse, but something very different. In the study of Sri Aurobindo's commentary so far, he has pointed out that the word Ashwa, which means literally horse, has a deeper origin, and it means, in its root sense in Sanskrit, the sense of existence pervadingly, to possess, to obtain, to enjoy. And by extension, therefore, there is the sense of force, strength, solidity, sharpness, speed. And so, for the rishis, to use this word Ashwa was to speak of a power made up of force, strength, solidity, speed, and enjoyment that pervades and constitutes the material world. And this is how Sri Aurobindo has described it. And he says we have immediately the image of the Virat Purusha, Brahman extending himself to become the whole material cosmos. But if this is the sense of the word Ashva, Sri Aurobindo then continues this by revealing the deeper sense of dawn. The Sanskrit word used is Usha. Usha is described as the dawn, the same Usha who is described in the first canto of Savitri as the goddess who is the goddess of dawn, who brings the light into the world, wakes up the world. It is the same Usha of the Veda, but Usha itself, Sri Aurobindo points out, has a deeper sense. The word Ushas means etymologically coming into manifest being, and it could mean also desire or yearning. Ushas or dawn to the early thinkers was the impulse towards manifest existence. No longer a vague movement in the depths of the unmanifest, but already emerging and on the brink of its satisfaction. So when the Vedic rishis say Usha, they have this sense of a movement emerging from the unmanifest and has taken sufficient form that it is on the brink of satisfaction of its own expression. And immediately, this first verse and the first line of the first verse acquires a more profound sense. The physical image of the horse begins to fade, and we already begin to see something deeper, which we could translate simply as this. The emerging, manifesting movement is the head, the front of the pervading power, force, and speed of the divine manifestation. This is how we could translate it. And the same thing spoken in Sanskrit would be Ushava Ashvasya Medhasya Shiraha. And if we now take Usha as dawn and Ashva as horse, we would translate the same thing into English as dawn is the head of the horse sacrificial. But we are speaking here not of a physical dawn or a physical horse. We are speaking of cosmic powers, which in their essence are formless. And yet they are represented in all of the cosmic working. We see something which is also outside the domain of our physical conception. How do you conceive of this movement to grow into manifestation? Emergence out of unmanifest, from the darkness as we visualize the unmanifest, emerging out of that darkness and poised on the brink of an overt expression in form. Not yet fully formed, but already experiencing its satisfaction of manifestation. And on this brink, poised, is Usha, the dawn, the front of the horse sacrificial. And something so profound and yet so abstract to our senses could not be conveyed easily, could not be articulated in material words unless it could be anchored also to a material form and a material sound which is tangible to our senses. And therefore the rishis used this, what is described as the Twilight Language. The language at once is an expression of a profound truth that has no obvious form or image to the human sense mind. It has a concrete reality to our own higher spiritual parts. But to the human mind bound in the senses, it is inaccessible. And yet at the same time, if those words are representing something which is materially, visually, tangible, accessible, then the surface part of our mind can reach out and grasp that image, while our own higher parts reach out and enter into the deeper experience of the spiritual truth that is represented before us in the form, in the sound. So when we meditate on this verse, and just the first line of the verse, Om Ushava Ashvasya Medhasya Shirah. At the beginning, we could visualize this picture of the horse. And the front, the head, is the dawn. Immediately, the picture begins to blur. It acquires a character which is already not so sensory. We see this emerging power of the horse, its head leaning forward, its energy straining to manifest. And the front, the head, is the light of dawn. And surging forward, it becomes the day, the light, the manifestation, the movement forward to manifest. And already beginning with our sense mind, we are led to something which is more essential, more abstract, more true. And as we dwell on this, repeating the verse, allowing in the method of the Vedic knowledge to listen in soul, to allow the Shruti in the soul to respond, to vibrate, to echo, and let the response gain in clarity, intensity, and fullness. This is the method of the Vedic knowledge. When we allow this to happen in us, this same image now already leads us bit by bit into its most essential truth. And we experience this powerful movement of the surging divine energy pouring out of his unmanifest origin, and as an outburst, which we call the Big Bang, the movement of energy bursts out, and its cutting edge is this dawn, Usha, the light illumining as she moves to manifest all that awaits behind still in the surge and moves into form as time unfolds in space. And already in our experience, we begin to anticipate the further descriptions of the verse. The sun is his eye, his breath is the wind, his wide open mouth is fire, the master might universal. Time is the self of the horse, and so on. But for now, even as we experience this forward movement, the energy manifesting, we will dwell on the deeper sense of the following words. The sun is his eye, his breath is the wind, his wide open mouth is fire, the master might universal. In Sri Aurobindo's commentary, he takes up these descriptions, though only briefly in this commentary. The elaborations of each of these symbols is already provided in his other commentaries and in his Vedic writings. So, in the text we are now reading, he only briefly touches upon these and moves on to the further symbols that follow. But we will refer to Sri Aurobindo's other writings for elucidation. From where we had paused last time, we continue. The sun is the eye of this great force. The wind is its life breath or vital energy. Fire is its open mouth. We are here in the company of very familiar symbols. We shall have to return to them hereafter, but they are in their surface application obvious and lucid. By themselves, they are almost sufficient to reveal the meaning of the symbol, yet not altogether sufficient. For, taken by themselves, they might mislead us into supposing the horse of the worlds to be an image of the material universe only, a figure for those movements of matter and in matter with which modern science is so exclusively preoccupied. So each of these, the sun, the wind, the fire, have also, just like the horse and the head of the horse, a material sense for us. And yet for the Vedic rishis, they had cosmic, essential meanings which are difficult to visualize, precisely because they are so pervading in all the activities of the cosmos that we cannot identify them with one single image easily. So in the Twilight Language, with the double meaning, we can still get a glimpse of each of these when we hear the word sun, wind, fire. But with that, we would have tended to reduce the image to merely the material universe. And so Sri Aurobindo reminds us and makes a correction. But the next image delivers us from passing by this side gate into materialism. And what's the next image? Time in its period is the self of the horse sacrificial. And the rest of the commentary focuses on the sense of time and how time is the self of the horse. But before we enter that description, we will pause at these three words, the sun, the wind, and the fire, and look at what Sri Aurobindo has to say of them in his other writings or his commentaries, and bring that description, bring that deeper understanding back into the image which we have been meditating on. And we turn first to Usha, because that's where we had paused last time. And we find in the secret of the Veda a description of dawn, Usha, in a chapter titled Dawn and the Truth. The truth here is the creative power, the supermind, the Vijnanam, by which this manifestation takes place. And in the verse itself of the Brihadaranyaka, each idea follows successively, building on the previous and preparing the ground for the next. So before we fully appreciate the meaning of the sun, we must see how dawn leads us to the sun. So in this text, Dawn and the Truth from the Secret of the Veda, page 128 of the Centenary Volume 10, he writes, dawn is constantly represented as awakening to vision, perception, right movement. The goddess, says Gautama Rahugana, this is the Rishi, the goddess fronts and looks upon all the worlds. The eye of vision shines with an utter wideness. Awakening all life for movement, she discovers speech for all that thinks. Vishvasya vacham avidat manayoho. So this is the actual text from the Veda that he has translated. The goddess fronts and looks upon all the worlds. The eye of vision shines with an utter wideness. Awakening all life for movement, she discovers speech for all that thinks. And we have already here in this description many of the elements which were touched upon in the text of the Brihadaranyaka. So the dawn is the head of the horse, sacrificial, and it is this which is fronting and looking upon all the worlds. So the horse sacrificial with the head as dawn is looking upon all the worlds, but How does he see? The eye of vision shines with an utter wideness, and we are already preparing to appreciate the sense of the sun as his eye. But the eye of vision shines with an utter wideness, and the vastness of this cosmic vision is now touched upon. And then, awakening all life for movement. And remember, here we read in the text, his breath is the wind, and it is this Vayu which is the life movement, awakening life in the cosmos, and that is captured in the Vedic text. Awakening all life for movement, she discovers speech for all that thinks. And you will recall in the first verse of the Brihadaranyaka, the last line is, speech verily is the sound of him. And we see already in this single verse of the Veda an almost exact parallel of the unfolding movement of the description in the Brihadaranyaka. Sri Aurobindo now comments on this verse. He says, we have here a dawn that releases life and mind into their fullest wideness. And we ignore the whole force of the words and phrases chosen by the Rishi if we limit the suggestion to a mere picture of the reawakening of earthly life in the physical dawning. So the dawn here is this vast universal movement, not merely a physical sunrise. You will remember also in the first canto in Savitri, when Sri Aurobindo describes Usha and the dawn unfolds, soon after is the description of the life awakening. The trees, the birds, the animals, the human beings. And when following that sequence, you see the unfolding evolution in that awakening also. So you see the multifacetedness of the suggestion when we speak of dawn releasing life and mind into their fullest wideness. And you see it here as a cosmic movement which spans both space and time. Spanning space, she gazes out at the whole universe, all the worlds. Spanning time, she unfolds all the possibilities of life form and mind in what we call evolution. So dawn releases life and mind into their fullest wideness. Then he says, and even if here the word used for the vision brought by the dawn, chakshuhu, is capable of indicating only physical sight, yet in other passages it is ketuhu, which means perception, a perceptive vision in the mental consciousness, a faculty of knowledge. So in the text which we just read, dawn is described as having this vision. Chakshul, literally translated, would be the eyes. But he says later, the word is ketuhu, which means perception. But it is perceptive vision in the mental consciousness. It's a power of knowledge. And so the seeing, the sight of dawn is not merely the sight that the human experiences when the light reveals the world, but it is a perception in the mind, a perception of knowledge, including the sense mind and therefore the knowledge of the material form of the world, but more essentially the perception of mind itself, of knowledge itself in its essence, in its abstract form. So he continues, Mother of the radiances, this is Usha, Mother of the radiances, she has created this perceptive vision of the mind. Gavam Janitri Akritapra Ketum. So he quotes from the Veda. She is herself that vision. Now, and he quotes from another verse, now perceptive vision has broken out into its wide dawn where naught was before. So perceptive vision, as it breaks out from the zero, from the blankness, is that movement of dawn. So she is herself that vision. She is by her perceptive power possessed of the happy truths. This vision, this perception, this vision is, we are told, that of the immortality. It is the light, in other words, of the truth and the bliss which constitute the higher and immortal consciousness. And then he explains how night in the Veda is the domain of ignorance in knowledge, and by extension, therefore, evil, sin, suffering, etc. And the light is the coming of the illuminated higher consciousness which leads to truth and happiness. Thus, Vasishtha says of the goddess, dawn comes divine, repelling by the light all the darknesses and evils. And in a number of verses, the goddess is described as awakening, impelling, or leading men to right doing, to the happiness. So this is from the text, from the secret of the Veda. And we have already a deeper sense of what Usha represents. And this dawning movement is the higher light of the Satchidananda, now gently entering and then later flooding in to manifest in the domain of darkness. It sees, and it is itself the seeing. And this prepares us now for the next symbol, which is that of the sun. In this commentary, as far as it is written, Sri Aurobindo simply says these images, these are familiar symbols, and we will return to them later, which unfortunately in the text that survives, he does not fully return to. But we will turn to the symbol of the sun now from another text, from his Synthesis of Yoga, and we see there the deeper sense of this solar symbol. In a chapter titled Vijnana or Gnosis, which is chapter 22 of the Yoga of Integral Knowledge, part 2, page 462 of the edition that I have. He's explaining the distinction between the intuitive consciousness and the supramental. The intuition itself, he describes how it emerges in the mind as a flash of light. And the knowledge is revealed between the start of the flash and the end of the flash. And the mind can be trained gradually to free itself from the crystallizing intellectual action. And we can train the mind to think in a stream of successive and connected intuitions, to pour light upon light in a brilliant and triumphant series. And this is the passage from the first glimmerings of the intuition, which is like a lightning flash and then there's darkness again, to the fully awakened radiance of the sun in the supramental consciousness. The transition is through a series of flashes of intuition, and each intuition as if reveals more of the previous intuition, and the series of flashes becomes more and more frequent, more and more complete in their scope, almost becoming a continuous lightning until the light remains, sustains, and we move from the intuitive mentality to what Sri Aurobindo calls the overmind. But here, the difference between the supramental consciousness and the intuitive has to be explained, and Sri Aurobindo again has the same difficulty that the Vedic rishis have. How do you describe those domains of experience which are not accessible to our sense mind as it is presently organized? And so he has to use a symbol. The difference, not easy to define except by symbols, may be expressed if we take the Vedic image in which the sun represents the gnosis. There's a footnote. So the sun is called in the Veda Ritam Jyotihe, the light of the truth. So, he takes this Vedic image and explains the imagery. If we take the Vedic image in which the sun represents the gnosis, and the sky, mid-air, and earth, the mentality, vitality, physicality of man and of the universe. Living on the earth, climbing into the mid-air, or even winging in the sky, the mental being, the Manomaya Purusha, would still live in the rays of the sun and not in its bodily light. So in the Vedic image, it is such a simple image as to be almost deceptive. We simply have to look at the world in an open sky. We see the earth before us. We see the sky high above, almost like a bowl covering, enclosing the earth. And in between is the mid-world where the air flows. And this is the symbol of the earth, material plane, the vital worlds, and the mental world. This is the domain of the human experience. And you see how perfectly appropriate the symbol is. The material world has this hard, dark rigidity of matter. The life world is the air flowing, moving, the breeze that blows, which animates, which drives, which brings life, energy, freshness of oxygen, etc. And above that, the mind brightly lit, but enclosing, covering, preventing us from seeing beyond. And in the mind is the activity reflected. The light of the sun is as if spread out and cast on the earth by this great dome of the sky. And occasionally we have the clouds moving also. But the sun is right there in the center of the sky. It is as if above the sky, and yet we see it only as this circular form that rises and sets. And this is the supermind. It is from there that all the light of the mind comes. It is from there that the heat comes which energizes and drives the winds. And it is from there that the earth world and our sense experience of matter is lit up. But when we look at the earth, when we are immersed in the material experience, we eat the fruit, appreciate the flower, and play in the sand and soil, we do not see the sun. We see only the light that comes from the sun, which allows us to experience this world. Similarly, when we enjoy the freshness of the breeze, we do not see that its source is the sun. Or when we look at the sky, we do not recognize the sky is lit up from the sun. And it is in this way that the whole cosmos exists for us. The source is always the same creative power of the divine, the supermind. But it illumines the mind cosmically and in us. It drives the life energy in the cosmos and in us. And it is that which allows us to experience the material world and know it, cognize it even through our senses. But it remains always behind, secret, unseen. So the image is so simple. It's almost as if the rishis were merely wandering on the earth, tending to their cows and horses and describing a beautiful landscape. But the symbol is much more profound, as we see here. So he continues, living on the earth, climbing into the mid-air, or even winging in the sky, the mental being, the Manomaya Purusha, would still live in the rays of the sun and not in its bodily light. And these three descriptions are of the human life, human mentality, and even describe human types and degrees of awakening. We may obviously live on the earth, that is, we are immersed in our sense experience. Or we climb into the mid-air, and there's a struggle to rise above the senses and to perceive things more profoundly in the sense of life energies. But we need to break free of the earth and as if float away, winging like the bird. but we need the support of the air before we can fully float up and fly freely. So winging into the sky, and that's the state when the mind is completely free of the senses and can enjoy the pure domain of thought, where you ask questions which have nothing to do with the sensory world. Why am I here? Who am I? What is the sense of purpose of life? What is truth? What is right? What is falsehood? What is wrong? Why is there suffering in the world? None of these questions have any connection to senses, and you cannot represent those questions by images and forms. They live in realities of the mental domain, and we float freely in that world. But always, he says, we live in the rays of the sun and not in its bodily light. And what's the difference? And in those rays, he would see things not as they are, but as reflected in his organ of vision, deformed by its faults or limited in their truth by its restrictions. So when we are in these three worlds, the triple worlds, the lower triple worlds, we do see, and even when we see in the domain of pure thought, we do see, but there is the reflection of the truth, not the truth in itself. And the reflection is in the organ of vision, deformed by its faults, limited in its truth by its restrictions. So on the material plane, it's obvious, our eyes. It is in our eyes that the light reflects, and therefore we say, I can see. But what if the eye is defective? What if the lens is not flexible and we see blurred? I do not see clearly. Is it an O or an A or a C? I cannot make out the letter. Is it a horse or a cow? I cannot make out the difference. It's a blur. In the next region, similarly, in the mid-air, in the vital perception, we can sense, we can know, but again there is an organ of registration, and its limitations distort the truth. We do not have the truth directly, but the light from the reflection enters our perceptive organs, reflected within, we translate into a perception. And the same with the mind. If our mind is agitated or inflexible, just like our physical eyes, then the same light coming in is distorted by the inflexibility or the agitation, and we do see something, but we see blurred. We see forms that are not, or we interpret them differently. So, deformed by its faults or limited in their truth by its restriction, we see things not as they are, but as reflected in his organ of vision. But what's the difference with the supramental? But the Vijnanamaya Purusha lives in the sun itself, in the very body and blaze of the true light. He knows this light to be his own self-luminous being, and he sees the whole truth of the lower triplicity and each thing that is in it. He sees it not by reflection in a mental organ of vision, but with the sun of Gnosis itself as his eye. For the sun, says the Veda, is the eye of the gods. The mental being, even in the intuitive mind, can perceive the truth only by a brilliant reflection or limited communication and subject to the restrictions and the inferior capacity of the mental vision. But the supramental being sees it by the Gnosis itself, from the very center and outwelling fount of the truth, in its very form and by its own spontaneous and self-illumining process. For the Vijnana is a direct and divine as opposed to an indirect and human knowledge. So I've read through the whole text of this paragraph, but we will pause again and elaborate on the image. There are two Purushas, that is the observing conscious being Manomaya and Vijnanamaya. We as human beings are Manomaya Purusha, the mental being, mental consciousness, mental person first as and foremost. A mental being inhabiting a physical body animated by life energy. And although the body has its own organ of sight, the life energies have their own perception, and our mental consciousness has its own power of perception and thought. All three finally are registered by us in our mental consciousness. The body may register the light, the brain may process the electrical signals, but if the mind is distracted, I have not seen. So the true person who sees is this mental being, the Manomaya Purusha. All the rest of the machinery and the parts of our being lead to this station of observation, of knowledge. And the problem with the Manomaya Purusha? He can observe the truth only by a brilliant reflection or limited communication, subjected to restriction and inferior capacity of the mental vision. Even the physical sight finally is reduced to the limitation of the mental vision. We are mental beings, and mental vision is our only true vision, even when we translate through the body's senses. But the supramental vision, the Vijnanamaya Purusha, the status of consciousness in the oneness of the truth, lives in the sun itself, in the very body and blaze of the true light. He knows this light to be his own self-luminous being. So where is the light? It's not coming from outside. Its consciousness itself is the light. When it sees, therefore, it does not see by a reflection of the light, it sees in the light of itself. And what it is in its light is what it sees. There is no subject, object, and observation and knowledge in between. You are what you observe, you are the knowing in which the thing exists. So no reflection. This is therefore the most direct, the most complete vision. It is therefore the truth. The sun of Gnosis itself as his eye, for the sun, says the Veda, is the eye of the gods. And we come back to this image we have touched upon many times before, and I have made allusion to other traditions, particularly the Egyptian symbol, which is so close to the Vedic image, the eye of Horus, the eye of God that sees. This image is carried in, still even today, in various surviving mystical and occult traditions of Europe, including the Rosicrucians and the Freemasons and others. They describe it as the eye of God, and you will see the same image to this day represented in the US dollar bill as a little eye which shines down and a pyramid below. But this is such a profound symbol, always representing the truth, but the truth not closed, not immersed in its own deep trance, but the truth looking, manifesting itself and becoming the world. So the eye is not merely seeing the world that already exists. As it sees, it forms the world that emerges from that source. So the eye of the gods is also the seeing. The supramental being sees it by the gnosis itself from the very center and outwelling fount of the truth, in its very form and by its spontaneous and self-illumining process. And you see already in it is this movement of creation, movement of unfolding, welling out to become whatever it sees itself to be. And this is how the supramental vision sees as distinct from the vision of the mental being. So with this deeper understanding of the sun, we turn back to the cosmic horse, and you see now what is conveyed in this very simple statement: the sun is his eye. When this movement of manifestation turns with the front of Ushas coming into manifest being, the power that manifests on the edge of coming into manifest being, it sees what it must manifest. And what it sees becomes the movement of manifestation. It is itself what it sees. It forms, materializes its vision as it moves forward. And now immediately after comes the wind. The wind is its life breath or vital energy. Fire is its open mouth, and the sequence is important. Until there is the seeing, and the seeing casts into form, there cannot be the animation of the form. The life-giving breath, of which we will read some passages next time, the life-giving breath infuses itself in the form after the sight has given form. And the life animates, gives it the concreteness, the reality, and the interconnections with all else. It is the life energy which brings the force that pulls or pushes in the material domain, which attracts or repels in the vital domain, which sets up relationships and arrangements in the mental domain. So the wind is its life breath or vital energy, and that follows after the eye has seen what it wants to unfold. And then after that, fire is its open mouth. Fire, Agni, is the creator of forms, which gives stability to forms in the Veda. And of that also we will read some passages later. But here, the open mouth is very suggestive. Fire is its open mouth. It's not that from its open mouth fire comes out. That is how perhaps we may represent it if we have to force fit into the physical form of the horse. Fire is its open mouth. And you can see here the profundity of the symbol. I'll describe it in two different ways. First, from the more material form of the symbol. Visualize this horse running forward, leaning forward into the moving into manifestation with tremendous speed. And you notice as the horse moves forward, the thing which first comes, which first touches, is the tip of the mouth, the open mouth. And just behind that is the nose, the nostrils through which the air breathes. And just behind that, the eyes. Now it's actually the reverse of this sequence. But the sight goes farthest. The sight has already laid out the region where he wants to go, what he wants to become, what he wants to manifest, going very far, even before the tip of the nose reaches there. The breath which breathes out goes much farther than the mouth. It is already beginning to animate what must now take form. But it is only when the mouth enters that you have the concreteness, the contact with the horse. The edge of the form has been established. So you see this sequence of the sun as the eye, the wind as the breath, and the fire as the open mouth has a very interesting relationship. In the sequence of manifestation, it is the sight, the breath, and then the fire. But in the way the horse moves, you see in the reverse sequence the arrangement. The action is more subtle, the sight is far more subtle, the breath is less subtle, and it is only in the fire that the concreteness of the front of the horse, the concreteness of the manifestation is completed, and now we experience the touch of the horse. It is there. So fire is its open mouth. It is this creative power that gives form and stabilizes the form, which now leaves the universe in materialization. Of course, it's not only the material universe, it is the mental, vital, and material worlds. But we see this formative action of fire most concretely in the material world, of which we will read later. But for now, we'll just hold this relationship between the three and dwell on it. So I read the text as Sri Aurobindo puts it here. The sun is the eye of this great force, the force of manifestation, the divine himself manifesting. The sun is the eye of this great force. The wind is its life breath or vital energy. Fire is its open mouth. We are here in the company of very familiar symbols. We shall have to return to them hereafter, but they are in their surface application obvious and lucid. By themselves, they are almost sufficient to reveal the meaning of the symbol, yet not altogether sufficient. And it is this edge where you see the meaning and yet you feel something is missing, there's something more. It is this edge which is the most interesting, because it is on this edge that the intuition can enter and reveal the more that must follow. So next time when we read of the life breath, the wind and the fire, we will see that in all materialization, it is this sequence that follows. First, the consciousness must see what it wants to create. When the image is fully formed in all its details, then the life energy is infused into it to give it vitality, to give it the energy that will make it concrete and hold it together, that will make it act in the world. And at that point, the materialization is only partial. It has not acquired still a stable, sustaining form. So the third step is the action of the fire principle, which concretizes and gives material form. So you will, as described in the occult teachings, when an object is materialized, it is first created by the mind's eye. Into it, the life energy is infused, and then it is densified to give material form. You're actually describing this process in the 3 steps. And this is how the whole universe has been cast. That is how an individual may materialize an object or reverse it to dematerialize, but this is how the whole universe was materialized by the divine. And so this whole description of the horse and the frontal parts of the horse is the divine creative consciousness moving to materialize itself to become the material universe and the whole cosmos and all the 3 worlds as it unfolds. And then, in all this, the soul, the essence, is time. Time in its periods is the self of the horse sacrificial. And you see how that becomes obvious. As the space and forms are cast out, what is the essence of this movement of unfolding? The soul, the essence is time. But not time as the principle of time, not kala, but ritu, the unfolding rhythms of time, which Sri Aurobindo will elaborate later. But in that elaboration he says, not matter then, but time, a mental circumstance, is the body of this force and the material universe, whose eye is the sun and his breath the wind. So with this we pause for today, and we will continue the text the Sunday after next, which is the 9th of March, as I will have to be out of station next week. And we will show instead some of the earlier talks to continue the mood of this study. And we will reread the first few lines of this verse and meditate on it in the spirit of the method of Vedic knowledge, to listen in the soul, to allow the Shruti in the soul to respond, to vibrate, to give response, and let the response gain in clarity, intensity, and fullness. Ushava Ashvasya Medhyasya Shirah Suryash Chakshu Suryash Chakshuvate Prano. Om. Dawn is the head of the horse sacrificial. The sun is his eye. His breath is the wind. His wide open mouth is fire, the master might universal. Time is the self of the horse sacrificial. Heaven is his back, and the mid-world his belly. Earth is his footing.